Off week for Alabama. And as the team rests up for Georgia and the preparation to get ready for the Dogs, what do we think Alabama needs to do to improve between last game and Georgia? We're going to talk about that and more right here on Cover Crimson. Roll Tide, everybody, with Clint Lamb. I'm Mick Gillispie. Great to see you guys. And Roll Tide, as I said before, off week. Alabama coming off of a 42-10 win. As Luke Fickell said, an ass whooping put on his Badgers. We'll see them again next year in Tuscaloosa. Georgia, who's Alabama's next opponent, ranked number 2. They got stripped of their number 1 ranking because Arch Mania has started down in Texas. But they come to Tuscaloosa, not this week, but next week. And Clint, Alabama's building something, right? They got some days off, and then all of a sudden they got to be building towards this matchup.
Yeah, and that's kind of it's a really good time to start reflecting on Alabama. Like I guarantee you there's members of the coaching staff or, like off-field guys who are already looking ahead to Georgia. I'm sure, Kalen DeBoer's looking ahead to Georgia. I'm sure Kirby Smart and his staff and his players are looking ahead to Alabama right now. But, there has to be a certain amount of reflective period in these types of situations. It's not often you get multiple bye weeks. And so, take this opportunity to get healthy, get rested up, but also get some of the things fixed that maybe you're not doing well and really focus in on the things that you are doing well, how you can implement those things or make those things even more dangerous and how they can be useful to you. That's something that Alabama really needs to be focusing on.
Yeah. So when you see what Alabama was able to accomplish against Wisconsin, the offensive line, I think you got to start there. The entire offensive line, players of the week, they did a great job. And that was supposed to be the strength of this football team. And when those guys were at full strength, it made such a big difference.
It did make a difference. Yeah. And that's kind of, it's not just getting guys back, it's getting guys back in the right position. Like, Elijah Pritchett, maybe he's not a blindside protector, but he's helped a little bit more. Your right tackle is typically more of your run stopping tackle, or not run stopping, but a run blocking tackle. And maybe that fits Elijah Pritchett a little bit more. You don't have to worry about being on the blind side and your quarterback can't see when things are coming. So when, Elijah Pritchett does give up pressure, Milro can see it. Maybe it doesn't automatically equate to a sack. So him being on the right side, that's beneficial. You get Caden Proctor back at left tackle. That gets Tyler Booker back to left guard, where I think he's an elite player. And Caden Proctor, he played pretty well. I mean, we got to remember he performed well. The opponent was not great. Like, even though it was Wisconsin, their defensive front's nothing to write home about. I think it's kind of been a weak point of their team up to this point. Their best defensive lineman got injured. Their pass rush has been very limited. So I don't think this was a great test for Caden Proctor necessarily, but it was a road environment. It was a tough atmosphere to play in. And he, how long has it been since this guy's played? He didn't participate in the spring. He went through fall camp, but then he gets, injured prior to the first game. So no live game reps since last year, not even in an 8-day type of setting. So, for him being a guy who is probably a little bit rusty, I think this was the perfect opportunity. It was really important for him to get back on the field for Wisconsin, because if he was looking to get his first action in forever since Michigan against Georgia next week, probably wouldn't have been a great combination. And so I think that's really important. I think, really just the way that Parker Brailsford's playing this offensive line, it can really make some strides in the coming weeks. And they're also getting, guys like Wilkin Formby and Geno Vandermark, your top reserve tackle, your top reserve interior offensive lineman, both some added reps. And so that will help from a depth standpoint and an experience standpoint moving forward. But one thing we have learned is, Mick, I don't know. I mean, the feeling really good about 6 or 7 offensive linemen probably isn't the case. We thought that going into the year. Maybe that changes as they get more experience. But for right now, you got to stay healthy with those first 5.
Yeah, but at least you have the first 5 back, and they're going to have the biggest test of the season. Last year they stood up to this test, but it was also after they should have lost to Auburn and didn't. And they were hyper-focused, and that's kind of how Georgia feels after they played Kentucky, right? They could have lost. They probably should have, but they didn't. Guys, I want to remind you that Cover Crimson is brought to you by MyBookie.ag. MyBookie.ag, double your initial deposit. That's right. MyBookie will double your initial deposit when you use the code next round. Kick off the football season with MyBookie.ag and double your initial deposit using the promo code next round. Clint Lamb and Mick Gillispie talking about Alabama and Georgia, kind of still, though, looking back at the Wisconsin game. And Clint, as much as I appreciate Alabama going on the road and dominating, I just don't feel like that game translates much into what Alabama has to do against Georgia. Georgia is far superior of an opponent than Wisconsin. They do things differently than this Wisconsin. They have equal talent to Alabama, some spots better, some spots slightly worse. But, I mean, you're talking about two superpowers. And for Alabama, I just hope that they don't get a false sense of confidence because of the way that thing went and then watching the Kentucky film.
Well, I mean, what Alabama needs to keep in mind is both times that they've beaten Georgia, the last 3 times they've played them, it's been as them being viewed as severe underdogs, and no one was really giving Alabama a chance. I mean, maybe the betting line wasn't too out of hand because it is Alabama, but everybody was picking Georgia. And the one time that didn't happen in the last 3 games, where it was kind of viewed pretty evenly, Georgia ended up winning. So going into this game, if anything, I think people probably view it fairly evenly with the way Alabama played against Wisconsin, with the way Georgia played against, Kentucky on the road. Some, obviously the betting line came out. I don't remember exactly what it came out at, 7.5, I believe. And then it immediately dropped down to like 2.5. So that, is a lot of respect towards Alabama. That absolutely has something to do with how both teams performed this past weekend. But, so Alabama needs to keep that in mind. Like, they're not going to be going into this game with Georgia or anybody else, quote unquote, underestimating them. Now, granted, when you compare, like, obviously Georgia's a much better team than Wisconsin, but one of the things that you have to your advantage in this game compared to that is the fact that you're playing at home and all of that, the home crowd, the energy, all that stuff. You've got that at your back rather than having to worry about quieting a rogue crowd. That's going to be on Georgia's shoulders for this game. I think there's some pressure on Georgia just because, I've said it multiple times. If you lose this game after Nick Saban has retired, the narrative, and it's all about controlling narratives. You never want negative narratives. You want the positive stuff, but the narrative, it shifts from Kirby Smart having a Nick Saban problem to Kirby Smart having an Alabama problem. And so I guarantee you he doesn't want that based off of what happened last year. There's going to be that revenge game factor. Alabama needs to be weary of that. There's a lot of reasons why this should be a close game and a very fun game to kind of look at and analyze and do all the fun stuff. But also, Alabama should not be going into this game thinking they have any sort of significant advantage,
right?
Because it doesn't exist for either team, in my opinion.
Bama also hasn't played an elite quarterback. Carson Beck's going to be by far the best quarterback that they have matched up against. And I know Georgia's run game isn't as good as maybe we thought it would be, but it's still not bad. And they don't have some of the weapons that they had a year ago, but they're still really dangerous. I feel like we have a question on the defensive side of the ball. What's Alabama going to look like against the cream of the crop quarterback against elite athletes? They struggled a little bit against South Florida, who has mediocre to good athletes. Now they're going to be facing the best.
Well, I do think, USF's a good game to point to for this, because when it comes to pure athletes, USF's, I don't think on Georgia's level are even close, but they are way further along as far as their athleticism than Wisconsin. And so it is very different. Carson Beck, Alabama, Nick Saban last year in that SEC championship game, they saw some things on film that they could do. No one had really consistently pressured Carson Beck last year. I mean, there were times where he was under pressure, Missouri and some other places, but for the most part, just 4 quarters of being under duress, making him, be able to weather the pressure and still make big time throws. He did a little bit of that, but he was kind of frustrated a little bit, and you could tell. And I think that if you're Kane Womack, you probably need to be doing quite a bit of that. You've got to make him as uncomfortable as possible. Kentucky did that a little bit last week, and their offense really struggled. And so, you can get something similar, or maybe even more so, with Kane Womack and Alabama's defense. And Womack he mentioned in his press conference yesterday that they haven't had to reveal everything that they've gone into a game expecting to do or need to do. They've got some things in their back pocket. I know Kirby understands that. He knows it. He's going to be trying to anticipate some of that. That's one of the jobs of a coach. But hopefully some of those things is, some creative ways to put Carson Beck under duress and just see how he responds in a hostile, environment, bright and Denny at night.
Yeah, right. And how's Alabama's offense going to respond to that defense too? I mean, this is a test, not just the offensive line, but Jalen Milro. How's he going to look? How's the game plan going to be against this Georgia team that has a smothering secondary? What's Ryan Williams going to do? I mean, these are all questions for me that I look at and go, this game's going to come down to turnovers. If Alabama turns the ball over, they'll probably lose. If they don't, then it could be a really fun Saturday night in Tuscaloosa.
Yeah, and speaking of Milro, I mean, I've actually been going back and looking at some of the, putting together my snap count observations for the offense. The defense is already up at covercrimson.com. You can go check that out. I do a lot of really in-depth stuff. But one of the things that I was looking at with Milro is, on passes traveling 20 yards or more, this past weekend against Wisconsin, he completed 4 out of 7. He had completed 3 of 7 in the 2 games combined prior. He was only 1 for 5 for 22 yards against USF. But not only that, he had 141 yards and 3 touchdowns against Wisconsin on passes traveling, 20 yards or more. That's over 71%, close to 72% of his total yards for that game. He only threw for 196, and 141 of those are passes traveling 20 yards or more. All 3 touchdowns. And so, when you look at the number that is for the entire season, over half of his passing yardage, has come on the deep passes. So that's something that Georgia is going to be taking into account. I don't think, you don't even really need to hear those numbers to know. Alabama's kind of been boom or bust, where it's like running the football, whether it be with your 2 running backs or with Jalen Milro's legs, and then it's pushing the ball vertically. Georgia's going to try to do its best to take those 2 things away and say, what we will give you is the short to intermediate stuff. And we'll just see if Milro try to put him under pressure as much as possible, just like Alabama's going to be doing, but also give him, some things in the middle, short to intermediate parts of the field, and see if he can exploit it or take advantage of it. And that's something that, Milro at some point, it's probably going to be in the Georgia game, but even if it's not, someone at some point is going to force that type of game onto his shoulders. He's got to prove that he can kind of step up and deliver in those situations. The good part about it is there should be plenty of opportunities to get some of that stuff, because they are going to be so hyper focused on the deep passing game and the run game.
Hang out with us at covercrimson.com. Right now, if you buy the annual subscription, you get this Cover Crimson t-shirt. So that's a well worth deal, and we want you guys to be part of it. So, come check it out. Covercrimson.com. Clint's on there constantly. Chris, Stacy, I'm on there. We just get on there and talk Alabama football. And you guys, it's always fun to read your comments. Clint gives the snap count observations, which are the best in the business, and more. Covercrimson.com and Cover Crimson YouTube. Like and subscribe. Give us a thumbs up as you hang out with us here and talk Alabama football. Jalen Milro is starting to get some of that Heisman chatter, and you can't help it when you're scoring touchdowns like he has. 5 more last game. He looks like a guy that just is on a mission to get in the end zone, and he's doing that consistently for Alabama. Do you think that having the Heisman chatter and that talk will be something that will distract him?
No, I personally don't think so. What I would like to see from him, though, is just, I think they got him in a pretty good spot as far as the carries per game. I think he's averaging like 10.3 true carries. I want to say he's up near 12, but he's been sacked 5 times in 3 games. So I think he's got 36 carries on the year. So that's 31 divided by 3 games is 10.3 carries per game. True carries is what I would call it. And it's been a good mix of design quarterback runs and kind of unscripted off script kind of stuff for him as far as just taking off when it was a pass. The pass attempts though, I mean, I think he has like 52 in 3 games. So that's what, like, I think 17, a little over 17 per game. Some of that's just the fact that in the first game, he only had like 12 passes because it was like an explosive play, or it was like a 3 and out. It felt like, and then of course he gets pulled early against Wisconsin. That's gonna play a part, but it feels like that a lot of these weapons, the passing game has kind of been funneled through Ryan Williams and Jeremy Bernard.
Mhm.
And, everybody else is kind of dealing with, a couple of targets. No one's really getting any sort of heavy usage. I would like to see them be able to get more guys involved. Like Kendrick Law played a phenomenal game this past weekend, but it was all blocking based, and that's certainly a weapon. It's certainly a part of the offense. Like they're using that. I feel like the coaching staff has a really good feel for how to take advantage of his ability to block out on the perimeter.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you would like to see, him also get a little bit involved where he's not just viewed as a blocking threat. Like teams not only have to worry about him blocking, but also, what are they going to do to be creative and get the football in his hands? Is it manufactured touches? Is it on jets? Are they lining him up in the backfield a little bit, letting him play a little inline, and just trying to move him around and take advantage of matchups? I would like to see a little bit more of that, and that comes from the game planning and play calling. That's not really a Jalen Milro thing, but I would like to see him, make an effort to get more guys involved consistently than just, Ryan Williams and Jeremy Bernard, because if they can do that, this is going to be a really tough offense to defend.
I wonder if Kendrick Law isn't getting open because now all of a sudden other teams are keying on him, right? I mean, coming into the season, we figured he'd be the most explosive, most dangerous wide receiver that Alabama had. I mean, we kind of heard about Ryan Williams. We talked about that a lot. But the guy's a true freshman that's supposed to be in high school. I mean, we shouldn't see this. Or maybe is part of Ryan Williams' success the fact that Kendrick Law is drawing a lot of attention. But if I'm game planning, I mean, why would you put any attention on a guy that's not really doing much but blocking?
Well, I mean, and he's not getting opportunities. Like he's not getting really targets and stuff. And, I think part of, Kane Womack talked about kind of having, more volume as far as what they were bringing into a week and not having to use it. I think you can say the same thing for the offense, and maybe some of that stuff that hadn't been pulled out yet is Kendrick Law. Maybe they want to catch Georgia off guard and they're just doing a ton of creative stuff with him. We'll find out more. To your point, and I'm not saying this is the case with Kendrick Law. In fact, I kind of doubt it, but I will go back and kind of check on some of that because I would probably, like to know. There's been nothing that's kind of stood out to me on that front. But a perfect example of what you're talking about is, back before it was 2019, when you still had Jalen Waddle, you still had, Jerry Jeudy, you had Henry Ruggs, and you had Devontae Smith. Devontae Smith led the team in like receiving yards and stuff, but that was not because he was Alabama's best receiver at that time.
Right.
There was 4 quote unquote rideouts that you were trying to stop. And what Tua did a very good job of going from 2018, which I think was a shortcoming for him, to 2019, is he was taking what the defense was giving him more in 2019. And what the defense was giving him was not, was Devontae Smith. It was trying to take Jerry Jeudy out as much as possible. You're trying to take Henry Ruggs. You're trying to take Jalen Waddle. And so, I mean, you can't stop everybody. In fact, there was probably a couple of options on any given play out of those 4 guys, but there were other, pieces that opposing defenses were putting a heavier emphasis on. And Tua was like, hey, if you're going to give me Smitty, I'll take Smitty all day. And so that was my big question mark for him going from 2019 to 2020. You lose Jeudy, you lose Ruggs. Can Smitty be the wide receiver 1 that everybody's game planning against? Can he continue to be productive? Not only was he productive, but he just thrived in that role. So he answered that question very loudly, during that season, because then Jalen Waddle goes down and he is kind of the only known guy. We knew John Mechie stepped up as well. But my point is that, that's something that fans need to keep an eye on. Sometimes a guy's usage is because the defense is keying on him and they're kind of taking him out of the equation.
Right.
In places like Alabama, other places where you only have 1 or 2 really good players, they're going to force feed those guys anyways. And sometimes they're so good that they can overcome that. At places like Alabama or at Georgia, hey, if you're not giving them something, they got plenty of playmakers. They can go elsewhere. And so that's what, with Justice Haynes, I think a little bit of that's going on as far as the run game. But with, Kendrick Law, there's been nothing so far that stood out on that front. But I think it's a great question to ask. And it's something that sometimes when you're seeing limited usage, it's not because a guy's not performing, and it's not because the coaching staff isn't trying to, create or make an effort towards getting that player the football.
Final, I guess, topic today is how much pressure do you think's on Kalen DeBoer going up against Kirby? Nick Saban dominated Kirby. Kirby's beaten everyone else, but Alabama, his old stomping grounds. And this was, you could tell Kirby during the offseason, just expect it. The Alabama's going to fall apart. We don't have to worry about these guys anymore. And Kalen DeBoer has stepped up to the challenge every time, right? Even when he was at Washington, both times they played Oregon, big bad Oregon, they won, right? There's not any kind of smack talk. He smiles at you when he talks to you. Seems like a really happy-go-lucky guy. But now he's going to go up against big bad Kirby Smart. How much pressure do you think there is on him to have this team play their best?
Well, I mean, I'm sure there were similar questions about, you mentioned Dan Lanning in Oregon. You mentioned Steve Sarkisian in Texas. You mentioned, Lincoln Riley in USC. Like, he's dealt with this as far as some of the top coaches in college football and having that pressure of, okay, can you run with the big boys? And he's proven way more times than not, especially against those three coaches. I mean, he's proven it every time that he can, elevate his team enough to get the job done. Kirby Smart's a different beast. Georgia's a different beast. I think, as far as Alabama has been perceived as that, mountain, Georgia has, been kind of building their own mountain. They're kind of perceived differently than everybody else. So this is a different level than anything Kalen DeBoer's seen. But, even if there is some pressure, I think he's handled that sort of pressure to a lesser extent, admittedly. But, every time he's been facing these sort of questions or, concerns, he's rose to the occasion. And I think he's got the talent. I think he's got the coaching staff, especially defensively. Like, Kane Wommack's got a really good feel for things. That defense is not playing perfect, but you see guys really responding well to his coaching. I mean, he's putting a huge emphasis on takeaways, and what does Alabama do? And they're going out and they're executing what he's asking them to execute. And that's not always easy to do. Like, Nick Saban and his staff, was trying to get the turnovers fixed a couple of years ago and when they were super low, and just nothing ever came of it. So he wasn't able to reach his players, not necessarily him, but his coaching staff at the very least, to the degree that Kane Wommack is with this defensive group right now. That's a really good thing. So I think that, anytime there's pressure, I think surrounding yourself with people you're comfortable with, who know that you've been successful and can be that reinforcement, on top of the fact that you got, guys like Kane Wommack who you can really trust in those situations. I think he's set up for success all the way around. Not saying there won't be any pressure, but I think if you're an Alabama fan, you really shouldn't be concerned with, is that pressure going to be too much for Kalen DeBoer? Because so far it hadn't really seemed that way.
Yeah. And I think that's a good way to end it. The other part too is, can he do what Nick Saban wasn't able to do with last year's team and maybe the year before, and establish that consistency? More important than even winning the game now that we have the playoff. You play a consistent game. Say Alabama loses a close game, but they play consistent football. That's going to be a step in the right direction, because the next time you meet, you beat them. And Alabama definitely has to get that consistency back, because that was like that's what Georgia does. And that was a signature of Alabama up until, I'd say 2021, when we're all of a sudden now, you just week to week, you're really not sure what you're going to get. So I'm sure that's the big next step for Kalen DeBoer in Alabama. All right, guys, want to ask you again, like and subscribe. Great to see all of you in the comments section. As always, keep those comments coming. Give us a thumbs up. That's a way of saying Roll Tide. And be a part of Cover Crimson. Clint, Lamb, and I, we got an all-star cast of people that do shows on here, and we just want you to watch the videos and enjoy and really feel like you're a part of Cover Crimson. And it means a lot to us that you have made us part of your Alabama viewing day. Now, the other thing I want to say is that we're presented by mybookie.ag. Take advantage of this. If you like to go out there and put a little something on the game, you can do that at mybookie.ag. Use the promo code next round, and you will be able to double your initial deposit. Kick off the football season with mybookie.ag and double your initial deposit using the promo code next round. We will be back tomorrow, but a lot of great stuff. Elephant in the Room with Jay Coker. Check out the All-American Report with Mike Johnson. I thought that one was good yesterday. Respect the Process with Kelly and Chris. We got Bama and Bourbon with Aaron and LT. We got a ton of great shows here, and we want you guys to make sure that you, again, tell us what you think. And covercrimson.com. Right now, get the annual subscription, get this shirt. And it is comfortable. Both of us wearing our shirts today. I mean, what does that say? We're looking good, right, Clint?
We're looking phenomenal. Yeah, brother. Yes.
Thank you guys for hanging, and Roll Tide.